Greetings, and welcome back to the Rose Bros podcast. This episode, we're joined by Brandon Swertz, President and CEO of Archer Exploration Corp. Over the past 2 decades, Brandon has leveraged his original $100,000 investment saved up working on the drilling rigs into 6 exits with executive roles at both E&P companies and service-side businesses. Brandon's most recent sale of Anegada Oil Corp to Tamarack Valley Energy in June of 2021 sold for approximately $500 million. We sat down for a smooth cup of Rose Bros coffee and discussed leveraging $100,000 into 6 exits, fixing up energy properties, learning hard lessons from others, evolving business practices, and the realities of energy supply. Enjoy. Also, this podcast is sponsored by headracingcanada.com. Looking for high-performance ski gear this winter? In partnership with 4-time Olympian Manny-Osborne Paradis, headracingcanada.com is offering the lowest prices possible through its online storefront by passing brick and mortar savings on to customers. Check out headracingcanada.com for more info and get your high-performance ski gear for the upcoming season. Well, if you're ready, we can start.
Let's do it.
Brandon Swertz, you're the CEO of Archer Exploration. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, pleasure.
For anyone that is listening, what is Archer Exploration?
Archer is a privately owned explorer co, which earlier on in my career, and I've been doing this now about 20 years, was actually a pretty common type of small company. Often started with a blind pool of capital or maybe a few exploration ideas, and you'd go out and drill some wells, see how it went. Over time, as the business has gotten harder and harder, and access to capital has gotten skinnier and skinnier, there are a few of us left. Like I think the other more sizable one I would speak to on the private side is Spur.
This is your 7th company, like we were talking about.
Yeah, it's been so September will have been 20 years since we started putting the first one together. So yeah, it's been a bit of a road for sure.
You're an entrepreneur.
Kind of born into it. I don't think anyone would hire me. And when you're in a situation like that, the only thing you can do is work for yourself.
That's a similar story. Yeah, I can relate. Why energy? How'd you get into energy?
Well, I'm from Weyburn, Saskatchewan. And, rigs, since I was really young, just had a real appeal. And then my mom and dad's neighbor growing up owned Key Well Services that worked for Pan Canadian in the Weyburn unit, which is now, Whitecap operated. I used to work summers out there when I was in high school. And I did graduate, did really well in school, but thought take 1 year off and work drilling rigs. And then not be financially dependent on my parents when I eventually went to post-secondary. And then a long time later, I'm still doing the same thing I was then.
Always want to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I always thought I'd do something. You think rigs are, field jobs, and if you're doing one of them, you sort of have certain thoughts about it. But if you're sitting in an office in Calgary, you kind of have other thoughts about it. But the reality of it is, it's actually like some of the best days of my life have been spent standing on a rig floor. I still keep in touch with pretty much all the guys I worked with then. If you have the discipline, it's a tremendous opportunity to kind of save some money, and the skill set you learn out there at a pretty young age is pretty crazy, all things considered. And I worked for a guy who would have been maybe 34 when I started working for him with Trinidad Drilling, and he had probably been drilling at that point in time for maybe 13 or 14 years, but had a big farm, young family, and in Southeast Saskatchewan rigs, it's an 8-hour shift. So it's actually kind of a normal job depending on how far you're traveling to and from home. So I had the opportunity to work for a guy that knew everything. Like he'd been doing it a long time, had made a conscious decision not to go consulting or tool pushing a rig as a family decision. And I remember and worked rigs maybe 6 or 9 months or a year or something like that before I started working for him. And, on day one, we were doing a bunch of paperwork, like pipe tally. And he's like, "You good with math?" And I was like, "Yeah." And that's kind of where it started. So, you just had a guy that was sick of doing paperwork and was happy to teach you everything you knew. And later on, when I left to go to work for a directional drilling company I don't have any idea exactly what he said in my reference, but was just super helpful guy, career to date, like pushed me ahead years just by being a big supporter, and yeah, great guy.
The conventional narrative in energy to have success in the business is you need to be a geologist or an engineer. You have taken an unconventional career path. What do you think led you down that path, and why have you been successful at it?
Lots of things. If we sat down with 25 or 50 people that know me out of the downtown, every one of them would think I was an engineer, right? I got a guy's, senior guy in the city now, but I've been friends with him for 15 years, and we were having lunch like 3 years ago, and he's like, remind me, where you got your degree from. Mm-hmm. So lots of stuff you had to pick up later, done a ton of training. I've got a bunch of, log interpretation, continuing education is a big thing. Mm-hmm. You can learn a lot later, and I'm really fortunate. Like, we've got an exceptional reservoir and engineering team. I learned a lot of it later. I wouldn't necessarily suggest doing that. It's much more difficult to pick up, really high-end math when you're in your late 20s or 30s than it is when you're like 19 in an engineering class. But an interesting sort of quirk about this business is that the most companies out there, they really outsource their capital budget. So they'll hire engineering firms, consulting companies, and so forth, whereas we do everything internally. My background is entirely, I am an operations guy by background. Our capital costs reflect that. We do everything in-house. We outsource some of our safety program, but we actually determine where and how our money is being spent. And that allows, if you're working for somebody as a third party and you junk a well and have to abandon it, you're probably getting fired. Mm-hmm. We are willing to take those risks with the expectation that if we learn something and can further evolve our well design and reduce our capital costs, the value of that actually gets reflected in our reserve report, right? If you pull $1 million off a well and you've got 125 wells booked, you're up $125 million, just sort of as an example. So I think there's definitely been some advantages there and also disadvantages for sure.
To help paint a picture for the listener, when you first started your first energy company, did you kind of approach a broker to buy some production, or were you buying mineral rights? How did you get going originally? What was the process like?
Stripper production. So 6 wells, made a combined total of 21 barrels a day. A little facility that in no way, shape, or form would meet either SER or AER codes now, but a disposal well was on vacuum. So did lots of little entrepreneurial things. Was looking, looked at a variety of assets that were for sale back then. Got a little bit of help. I grew up with some guys. Their dad was a really successful oil and gas guy back in the day, and just little bits of advice here and there, which when you're kind of stumped and 5 minutes on the phone with somebody that's done it 100 times can often be a bit of a game-changing experience. So super appreciative to him for that, but always bought things that had something else to do. And if you're buying fixer-up properties, there's got to be things to fix up. And just went ahead and did that. And I had, pretty close to, I think, about $100,000 saved up from working rigs. And a Weyburn credit union loaned me a bunch of money. So ironically enough, my personal account is still there. And I've dealt with the same guy there for like 25 years. He loaned me the money for my first half ton, and my paycheck gets deposited into that same bank account today. So, definitely been a relationship thing. They definitely took a big risk, but, paid out for everybody. If you really look back, like founding a business from scratch, especially in energy, if you actually sat down on day one and wrote a list of everything that could go wrong, and probably will, none of us would ever do this. Like, there's a certain expectation that you will encounter problems, but there's an understanding that you're going to have to overcome them. And, that's really what this has been. Like, we've never had an easy company, right? Every one of these things at some point in time, or for the entire company, feels like a certain amount of trench warfare, to be honest.
So you had your first 20 barrels a day, and eventually you sold it, and you took the money and reinvested it, started again, or what?
Well, built that up. We had the real fixer-upper portion of that first deal was they had a 50% interest in a few wells. They had 50% of the minerals at 100% of the wells, and the owner of the other 50% was hiding behind a land company. So SER used to have a fairly lengthy process where you could force pool the other half, which you got, I think at the time, 300% of your invested capital back. So I went through, did the forced pooling. The SER guys are super helpful on just guidance on, what the application actually needed to look like. And then the owner of the other half paid us, or me, I guess, basically. They covered my entire debt on, 3 suspended wells that weren't actually producing. So, suddenly I swear it was maybe 4 months into starting the company, we were debt free. And then for a period of time, and this is like before Hugo Chavez became president of Venezuela, you could actually do some deals. So we bought the Southeast Saskatchewan assets in kind of a fire sale of a failing Alberta gas explorer. And it was just a treasure trove of crazy things to do. I think we paid it's either $500,000 or $550,000, and I twinned the disposal wells, and the power bill on the saltwater disposal was $25,000 a month, and the bill went to $5,000. So just like crazy low hanging fruit, grinding details. I was laughing. I stopped in at the facility, which is owned by a much larger company now, but I stopped in maybe 3 years ago and my safety manual was still there. So sort of, small world.
In summary, you eventually sold, or did you just roll everything up in bigger and bigger companies?
No, we built that one up, started in September 2002, rolled it into a public company, Peerless Energy, in August of 2005. We were kind of 400 barrels a day, so ran out of stuff to buy, and then started our own wells. And my background, when I was a directional hand and on the rigs, I've done tons of cased hole reentries, which are unfortunately sometimes prone to pretty substantial debacles. But once you do 50 or 60 of them on somebody else's payroll, you kind of really have an understanding of what usually goes wrong when things do go wrong. And if they go right, they're a huge cost savings. Like we, bring wells online for like 55, 60 cents on the dollar of a new drill. So did a bunch of stuff like that. Drilled a couple of, brand new wells, drilled some really big ones. Always cognizant that the most slam dunk well you ever think you're going to drill can be a dry hole. You've never really experienced joy in your life until you own, $500,000 well that makes 4 barrels a day. Right. So going to bed, after the well's flowing in those situations is always a little tough.
Was the goal to sell all along, or were you just hoping to pay yourself a nice salary, some nice dividends? What was your thinking along that?
Risk is always so crazy in this business. And one of the more sort of definitive things that have happened to me, I grew up, my grandfather had been a property developer and used to build like hundreds of homes, north of 100 a year kind of thing. And in 1982, when interest rates spiked, lost everything. And he made the cardinal mistake and probably did it with the best of intentions, but tried to save his own company. And, in circumstances like that, like real estate floats on a sea of debt. There's no way he ever would have kept it going, but grew up with a guy that, had been wildly successful corporate plane, and suddenly he had 2 or 3 guys working for him, building the occasional house, and, really just like business, when you really get right down to it, the fundamental decisions and the things that'll make you successful or not successful aren't very complicated, right? Like hire the best people and treat them fairly. Mm-hmm. Fire everybody that's not those things. Like you just had the opportunity, every day it seemed like if you took me to a construction site, or you just had some 2 sentences. And the other, where I'm at now, looking back, he never ever made excuses for the situation he ended up in, right? And I think that's a real issue in corporate culture, and it's a serious issue in entrepreneurialism. Like I love sitting down with successful people. How have you gotten here? And I don't care what business they're in. Like, you might learn something impossibly interesting sitting down with someone who owns 6 fast food restaurants. Flip side of that, you're also going to learn something if you call some guy whose company is going down and tell them they're a good person and buy them lunch. Well, the goal was not to get caught with nothing in the end, right? So
avoid the negative.
Well, you're never going to avoid the negative, and uncertainty in reality is a smart entrepreneur's friend. And no matter what business you're in, you can always manage risk. It's not gambling. Mm-hmm. No business person should ever think they're throwing down at a roulette table and it's either going to be black or red. You can always manage around those things. Like, we are in a cyclical business, but for a number of reasons, we do like to exit, every 3 to 5 years. Exploration's a really fascinating thing, super challenging. We like building things. Like, not everyone likes building facilities. Like, we built a production manager, depending on how you want to look at things, but 6 major oil batteries last company. We built this new one here, which has only been around for a little more than a year. We've built a big oil facility, a compressor station, and a gas plant in the last 12 months, 17 kilometers of pipeline through acreage country. We've just been doing it so long now. I don't know if the core group of us is capable of doing anything else. Like, it's all we know now. But it is nice 5 years down the road, you kind of become a manager of ESPs that spin to the right or pump jacks that go up and down. And it is, I think, pretty healthy for everyone. Like, we do sell out. We usually take the next summer off whenever that kind of lines up, and then sort of spool up again. And there's kind of a logical progression. Different people want to do different things. Like, you've had people I've done business with on this podcast. So Neil Rozel's bought 2 companies from us.
Shout out to Neil Rozel. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Neil's a real guy that you can always look up to. And, there's a number of people like that in the business. One thing I'll say about Neil, like, Neil's a real sharp cat on his own, but when you start looking down into the rest of that team there, if someone was to ask me, like, wow, name the top 20 under 45 entrepreneurs or executives in Calgary, he's got like 5 of them, right? And exceptional people, very capable, there. And then Vitel's bought our last one from us, Tamarack. So Tamarack's circumstance, by buying us, completely changed the company. So we do form a pretty valuable sort of building block for people that aspire to be bigger. We had a ton of free cash flow towards the end of the last company, which Tamarack used to initiate a dividend. So, I like that relationship. I don't think any of us really aspire, like, we're a pretty hands-on organization. I don't think we aspire to be 50,000 BOEs a day. Will we build this next one to a relatively substantial number? Absolutely. But do Brian and Steve or Spartan Delta or any one of a half dozen other companies that aspire to be bigger, does it make more sense for the industry in general and us personally to go out and find the next one? Continues to always feel like it does. So that's sort of the reason for our build and exit at some point in time mantra.
Skin in the game. Always been heavily invested in your own companies. How important do you think that is for entrepreneurship, for people looking to invest in your companies, to show them that your interests are aligned with shareholders?
Well, if somebody shows up and asks you to write them a check, the most important question you can ever ask them is how much of their own money they're putting in. And if you can actually talk somebody into, say, mortgaging their home, it's a pretty good chance they're going to make exceptional efforts to be successful. But having said that, there are a few people. I've got an acquaintance or buddy that recently stepped up to be CEO in the last sort of 12 months. And his comfort level, he's an exceptionally capable operator, and I would certainly invest with him. But his comfort level, he just flat out told me, he's like, I don't have comfort level you do, right? And I'm sure if we really sat down and, had him on this podcast and just asked him why, everyone comes from kind of a different situation, and he's probably got a great reason. Some people want to pull a little more money out over time, but I think one of the biggest issues in companies in general and in the energy space, like if we look at the biggest companies in this business in Canada, 2 of them have enormous insider ownership, and those are the 2 most successful ones. Mm-hmm. So, skin in the game is a big thing for sure.
When you started companies and ended up selling them, how did you make sure that there was value left for the company buying your company? Was it in the form of reserves, or is it facilities, or is it cash flow that might be there down the road? How did you structure that for the buyer?
In the oil and gas industry, everything, unless you're in the oil sands, and it's a different game, but for us, it's future drilling locations. If you're in the conventional side of the business, everything comes down to how many more wells you have left to drill, what they look like. And then, of course, you've got to look into your forecast and like, when do I want to drill them, facilities capacity, so forth and so on. But no, it's always been, future drilling upside. I guarantee you, if we sat down and had the Tamarack guys sitting here right now, they would do that deal with us again, absolutely, in the exact same situation. So it's very important as, serial entrepreneurs on our side that things work out for the buyer. Exactly. Right. So we always kind of want to leave 10 years of inventory in anything. So we'll actually sit down as we go and, based on exploration results and what we think our drilling inventory is, our goal is to get to the point where there's 10 plus years of what we know is there. And Alberta is such a wonderful place in terms of multi-zone potential. Once you, if you spend 5 years assembling a multi-hundred section land block anywhere, somebody in the future is going to find something else. It's inevitable. So by buying big blocks of land, your buyer, will get access to other horizons over time. But yeah, we're really obsessive compulsive about not drilling too much of our inventory.
The analogy is the warehouse of widgets. So if you buy your inventory, say you have 5 widgets, you paid $250. Maybe you add some inventory to the warehouse and sell it to the next guy, and he gets his value out, maybe knowing there's 20 widgets in the warehouse. Have you thought of it that way?
Yeah. Never. I've yet to hear any of our technical people use the phrase widget, but that is, it's not a bad analogy. But an oil well is a perpetually declining asset. So everything comes down to free cash flow. Realistically speaking, I think in the last sort of 12 months or 5 quarters, if you actually dig into the math on any of these conventional deals, they'll all sell for about 5 times free cash flow. Right? That's actually the metric. And, the business has actually become broadly and generally much more real in the last number of years, as everyone said, okay, like we have to pay a dividend. But for us as private guys, we always had to make real money, right? Mm-hmm. So to us, nothing has changed in terms of how we run our day-to-day. We want to drill wells that pay out, quickly, strong reserve life, minimal CapEx. But suddenly, the business is sort of caught up to what we've always done. And I think it was actually, without poking anybody directly, but a very successful guy that runs a company who's, starts with a W. He was the first public guy a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, to really just like, wow, we need to actually distribute cash flow to shareholders. Every deal I do is about raising that dividend and also long-term planning. And you can see that, right? They've got some multiple expansion. They've done exceptionally well, but now it's all about, wow, how many more years of drilling do I have? I'm not going to grow my production 30% a year for a public entity. We're going to grow it 3 or 5, and we're going to pay 7% or whatever the number is.
Do you think that was forced on the industry by the lack of capital available for everybody? Was it the ESG pressures? Was it the low oil price? Was it all of it combined, these pressures on the industry? Or what do you think caused that rethink of the way the industry's ran?
Oh, a host of reasons. I would start out by saying that obviously the capital available to us has shrunk dramatically. And I think the ESG thing it's here to stay. I mean, I look at the amount of time we as a tightly held private put into ensuring compliance, and between all the consultants that run around, like we basically have a full-time person on those things, which, is a lot. And the added CapEx across our business is very substantial. But as less investors showed up, people needed to either A, get the mom and pop people back, and B, needed to get generalists back into the business. Like there's, off the top of my head, I can only think of 2 or 3 Canadian energy focused funds. Whereas back in the day, like they fell from the sky. Sure, the average week in 2007, there were 10 bought deals done in downtown Calgary. It was craziness. Now there's like 10 a year or some ridiculous number. But people want a dividend. They want to get paid to own your stock. I think the business in a lot of ways feels a lot more real to me now than it did 15 years ago. So I think these changes have generally been very positive. Like, we all run very clean balance sheets now. We're not, when the next crash hits us, and could be in January or 5 years from now, I think Canadian energy space and the North American space, we're in really good shape to deal with it. So yeah, a host of reasons that everyone's paying a dividend now and everyone's running a real business. I mean, all the businesses that you thought were fundamentally flawed 5 or 6 years ago, like they've either went down or been merged with someone. But, the only thing you do know for sure is the management team's not around anymore.
The energy industry runs on the price of oil and the price of gas, kind of at the mercy of your price taker. So you can structure your business however you want, good or bad, but at the end of the day, unless you're hedging it at the mercy of this price. What happens if oil goes down? How do you think of it that way? How do you prepare for if prices aren't great? How have you survived all these years with such volatility?
Well, everything, there's opportunity in every crisis.
Low debt.
Yeah, watch our balance sheet relentlessly. We're obsessive compulsive about CapEx. We run a very different structure at Archer. It's probably more akin to a law firm than the average oil and gas company. So the top 5 of us, including myself in there, we all make the exact same. I don't want to say we're an easy place to work at, because there's definitely at various points in history been pretty serious turnover, but the people that make the cut and fit the culture, everybody stays. And in that, you have people that are very comfortable letting you know what their opinion is. And it's been my own experience that, no one person's ever been an oil company, and shutting up and listening to somebody, no matter what their role is in your business or on your board. I have very strong opinions and certainly a big part of our operation. But if, one of my partners, our CFO, feels uncomfortable about our balance sheet and determines we need to hedge 3,000 barrels a day, it's going to get done. And so we're always cognizant of what the downside is. Prices will crash again. There's inevitability to it. I don't know exactly when it happens, but I do know for sure, we might lose, a year, 6 quarters of cash flow, our cash flow at a reduced rate to, what our expectations were going into it. But, we'll certainly have a plan to accomplish something in those 6 quarters.
Is there ever a time where you were worried about the fundamentals of the business? You thought about retiring? And
I intend to die in place, I guess. Retirement, I don't know what I would do, and I've got a long runway left in my career. And I think of the core group of us, I'd be very surprised. I think there's at least the vast majority of us that we're just at the point now, you don't really know anything else. And, my best friends are at work. Love your job, never work a day in your life. There's definitely stress there. When you talk about crashes, though, 2014 was really tough. Unfortunately, I'm always too heavily invested in the energy space. And, I own a couple of service businesses, the guys I grew up with. And when that's kind of your diversification, like...
all the eggs are in one basket.
Yeah, broadly and generally. So I'll tell you, Christmas of 2014 was really hard on the mind. And, we run on the home front a super conservative balance sheet. Mm-hmm. But when I look back at it now, if Jen and I were going to get into trouble, financially at that point in time, then everyone else was probably going down ahead of us. So, the thought that things were a little too risked, looking back, it wasn't a super rational thought, and emotions are always such a dangerous game when you involve them with money. Mm-hmm. Right? So really, what did we do then? We just sort of battened down the hatches, rode through it, and came out the other side, and everything worked out. But yeah, 2014 was a hard one. 2008, not so much. 2020 also not so much. Not that I had any idea COVID was coming, although I think I got COVID before anyone else in Canada, in Denver. Okay. Down working there for a couple of days. But you kind of expect uncertainty in this business. And if you don't have that expectation, when it happens, it's a surprise. I don't know what the next particularly uncertain thing is, but I accept the fact that it's going to show up at some point.
5, 6, 7 companies that, like you said, that you've had is not luck. What was the process that allowed you to repeat the success and keep going?
Never, ever, under any circumstances, think you're smart. The minute that you no longer want to actually do the work will catch up with you. And every one of them, when you think about just, possibilities and permutations, what may or may not happen over a 5-year period or a 3-year period as you're building one of these, you don't really know. Mm-hmm. Right? So just, run good fundamentals. It's very interesting as times went on, I or one of us from Archer or many of us will have relationships with all the other teams that are still going. All the smaller operators, we see each other in the street, we go on vacation with each other. And when you look at every other team out there, like we were talking about Headwater and Crew earlier, they don't run a business a whole lot differently than we do. And that's not because we were reading their notes or they were reading ours. It's just certain things will work over a long period of time and other things won't.
How about things to avoid? If you were to look back in the last 20 years and you were to point to 2 or 3 things to avoid, what comes to mind? Debt or overexpanding, drilling too much, blowing up the balance sheet?
Definitely learned a lot of lessons when I was younger and have certainly grown as a manager of people, exponentially since then. I think if you look back to 2006 or something and sat down with 2 or 3 people that worked for me then, and then sat down with 2 or 3 people now, I think their opinion of me would be, certainly be very different. So, you've got to have good people. You've got to delegate. I think people would be stunned by what range of decisions the senior people at Archer are involved in the minutia, and also not involved in some of the big ones. I would honestly go back, and do everything again. Once you're involved in enough business, you eventually run into the cast of characters that, represents humanity in general. And like, I can flat out tell you, I've been stolen from. Mm-hmm. Those things all happen. Was it my own fault? Like, did you not have enough financial controls in place and so forth and so on? Yes. But would I go back and do it all over again? No, absolutely. Right. Like, the only, I tell my boys this, but it was definitely when our kids were younger, it was like my old partner and I went our own ways in 2009, and I was gone. Like, I took a bit of a paternity leave in the fall of 2009, but I went back to the kind of 80+ hour work week in January 2010. And when I see pictures of our oldest son now, you're like, I'm cognizant of the fact that I wasn't around as much Jen always says like they need you now that they're older. But I do regret, not being around more then. I don't think, financial success is largely irrelevant. Do we have great kids? Absolutely. Do I regret not being there more before the oldest guy got, really smart and learned how to talk back? Absolutely. But beyond that, business is business, and you learn as you go. I think all of us are wired, in different ways. Like someone who's an insane risk taker, if they roll the dice, like if you go into a casino and you spend enough time there, unless you know how to count cards, you will leave broke, right? It's purely statistical. Mm-hmm. And if you take too big of risks in any business, you will eventually leave broke. So you can never leave yourself in a situation where the downturn gets everything.
You've had a lot of success and definitely not luck, but luck plays a role in everyone's life. Was there a time you look back where luck maybe was on your side and things worked out in your favor?
We drilled a well in 2003 or 4. We shot seismic, and it was a great well. It was the first well I ever drilled, and we had a little company farm in on us that kind of paid, I think, $65 to earn 50 or $70 to earn 50 or something, and we'd pipe out to this thing, so we tied into our facility. But shot seismic a year later, and there was actually an erosional feature as a Mississippian well back at home. And there was an erosional feature, like if we would have moved the well over 1 LSD, it would have been a duster. Mm-hmm. So did we pick a generally good location? Yes. Should we have shot 3D before we drilled it? Absolutely. Drilling in that basin, I've always, having learned that lesson, and you feel so smart when you drill a big well, and then when the data shows up as to why it's a big well 12 months later, you sit there, and if you're not capable of being cognizant of exactly what the risks are and were at the time and your role in them, you are just setting yourself up to walk into the next one. And if you roll the dice, snake eyes is in there somewhere.
In terms of risk, what are we talking? Like can't make payroll next month, or was the bank always full, or how risky are we talking? Just to paint a picture.
Oh, that one, no. We had cash going into it. They just would have set the company back a year, which that's a different level of risk. I would never do any deal under any circumstances where the downside was 0, right? And nor should anybody.
Never came to that point.
No, never been anywhere near that, ever.
In terms of running your business, the reason we're here the reason you set up the business is to earn a rate of return. When you're thinking about your capital structure and maybe the cost of capital, was there a consideration on what your opportunity cost was? Did you base it on, say, a risk-free rate, or how did you come to that picture? What did you value your time and money off of?
So we've always been big into full cycle returns, and I've consistently struggled over the years. I certainly understand how the math is done to come up with a rate of return on an oil well, but rate of return on a fixed asset, like an office building or a strip mall or something, if it's 10%, that thing makes 10% every year. You can go bankrupt drilling 30% internal rate of return oil wells, and it's happened 100 times in the last 15 years in this basin. So
what did you do? What number?
Always looking at full cycle side of the business. I ignore any sort of individual well rate of returns in their entirety. Everything rolls up into the financial model. We will rerun our model, I swear, twice a week sometimes. But we are always looking at the full cycle business, right? So if we started $1 in 3 years, can we sell for $2? Right? If we can consistently do that, and that's kind of the numbers we've put up historically, it's you're successful. Like you're putting up 30% compound rate of return. You can't beat that.
Yeah, that's incredible. How hard was it to convince investors of that number? Now that you're in a position where things have gone really well, it's maybe easier, but to tell someone you're going to earn them 30% compounding rate of return is pretty high and may be a hard sell for some investors. Was it tough to paint that picture in the beginning? Or?
Early on, it was my money entirely, and then a friend of the family came in for the second acquisition. And then you left with a big success story oil prices went from like $17 to like 34 and we sold. So you had a 2X on the commodity. And, we did well doing what we were doing. The company that bought us, Peerless, they wanted a footprint in the area because the Viewfield Bakken had kind of emerged, it's a deeper horizon than we were chasing. Mm-hmm. So you had to, wind in your sails there. And then my old partner and I started up in 2005, more of an exploration focused business. That one, we still put the money together in kind of 2 months. It was a bit of a boom time, but generally have been pretty well supported. Have a few, really good friends in private equity and, family office south of the border that they always show up. So, and we've always, made them at least some amount of money, even in kind of the, the iterations that weren't as successful. So, yeah.
You haven't relied on the, obviously the public markets and all that stuff, and it hasn't been a struggle.
Certain businesses should be public, the aggregators and the acquirers. If you intend to run a business for a longer period of time, the only way you can compensate your staff is by, issuing them some sort of free trading, RSU or option warrant, whatever you want to run, and it has to trade. And in that circumstance, you need to be public. Doing what we're doing, you shouldn't be public. You could, as an explorer, miss 4 quarters in a row, dust wells. It could be the 2-well program, the 5th quarter into your business that builds the whole company. Mm-hmm. So if you were roaming around North America going to investor conferences and you had a story about pouring really expensive sidewalk into 3,000 meter deep wells, it's going to be real tough. Whereas as a private guy, our investors, are cognizant of how this business works. So yeah, we've always been private, and I can't see a circumstance where we'd be anything but.
Do you see the collective ego of downtown rise in a price scenario like this?
The business became so much more real in about November of 2014. I think ego isn't really a thing anymore. I don't think there's anyone running any company that isn't sitting there going, could oil be $50? Could be, right? I mean, our heavy producers right now are $25 diff plus or minus in a WCS, and the heavy guys are under WCS. So I'm sure they're not getting up at $76 oil super excited right now, but I think it's just so much more of a grounded place. I think about the parties everyone used to throw in 2007, and I was actually, I met my wife through a mutual friend at their corporate party, and it was pandemonium.
Shout out to Crescent Point.
It wasn't Crescent Point. It wasn't Crescent Point, although, I mean, wow.
Yeah, I think I had Trent Bayham on the podcast. I don't know if you know Trent, but his comment was that it shows up in balance sheets.
Yeah.
No more debt is a real reflection of the changing attitudes in downtown Calgary, perhaps, and maybe some of that swagger is gone. So.
You can run debt if you have a hedge book. If you do not have a hedge book, no person would drive to work in the morning with no insurance on their car,
right,
regardless of how much money they thought they were going to make that year and the relevance of the value of their car or not, right? Mm-hmm. No one would do it. So if you are going to put risk on your balance sheet, you have to sacrifice some of that future upside to ensure your revenue stream. And that's really what it is. Like, you are buying an insurance policy.
Yeah. Speaking in terms of insurance, the nature of oil is volatile. Do you ever think of your business in a way that you could profit or actually get better in low times? How do you structure your company so that you could take advantage of those low times?
Watch your balance sheet.
So you can make acquisitions when the price crashes.
You always try to. Yep.
Right. Problem is, everybody, or at least the smart CEOs, seem to recognize that. How do you compete with the other CEOs who have the strong balance sheets when things crash and you don't overpay and you're competing with those guys? Does it get competitive?
It's always a competitive business. Everyone always seems to want to ensure things are competitive, but balance sheets are all relative. We've tried to be an acquirer in every downturn, and future downturns certainly won't be any different, right?
Did you ever find yourself in a competitive situation where somebody else also had a strong balance sheet? And
I've never had an easy company. When you're on the inside, being part of the decision-making process, they're never easy. Like, ever. Sometimes from the outside looking in, people are like, well, you guys did such a good job. And you're thinking like, wow, I need to sleep for 2.5 weeks to recover from that one. So
it is November 2022 right now. Prices are pretty good. Some say we're in a bull market, maybe a super cycle. In your opinion, is the lack of supply resulting in a bull market? Are we heading into that? Or in your thoughts, where are we at?
I don't think we're through COVID or whatever the next COVID is. Like you're seeing, the headline on Bloomberg this morning is 30,000 cases a day in China, record COVID. Regardless of what we do here, they may still lock down. That whole thing, January could be record Chinese demand. I spent a little bit of time over the years in the Middle East. I firmly believe the Saudis, the UAE, and Kuwait have more capacity they can add should they so choose to. I think on the geopolitical front, Biden, perhaps, or whoever handles him, ignored the importance of their relationship with the UAE and in particular Saudi Arabia. So I know they did a few things. They pulled a bunch of missile defense systems out last year in September, which I'd heard from a friend that does business over there in a substantial bigger way than almost anybody from this continent, that the Saudi royal family was deeply offended and intended to teach Biden a lesson. Do I think that they will manage production through for the next while? Yes. I think geopolitical risks to the upside on oil prices exceed the downside. I'm, very surprised to see, $76, $77 oil right now. But if we woke up Christmas Day and oil was $54 WTI, just given the scope of the excess portion of the market that's paper over physical, too many machines doing too much trading, none of those things could really surprise me. Deal with those situations as they occur. Generally, in a way, I'm a perennial bull in this business, both in the E&P side, and I'm also incredibly fortunate in a service business to be partnered up with a couple of the greatest and most capable people ever on that side of the oil and gas business, and we've expanded that business through these downturns. We are a very tightly held private, and I think few people understand the scale that my partners over there have managed to build that to, and we've bought assets from failed competitors at pennies on the dollar. Nothing in this business should ever, under any circumstances, surprise you, especially when you're in Canada, right? For a number of reasons around offtake, we're probably one of the most disadvantaged in a lot of ways, just in terms of risk, oil basins that there are. So, you just have to be cognizant of all these things every day. All of your decisions have to be based on that.
Despite all the disadvantages, you still see lots of opportunity.
Oh, tons. I mean, I am in no shape or form, any sort of conspiracy theorist or denier of global warming or any of these things, but we will be burning oil until there's no oil left. That is the reality. Every bit of math I've seen is that as people get out of poverty around the world, they buy a car, right? And, do I think we're going to see more EVs built? Absolutely. Do other technologies start to fill a larger portion of the fossil fuels market or the overall, energy picture? Yes. But I honestly believe that the overall demand rate grows faster than any of these emerging technologies are ever going to be able to fill the void. And when you think about the energy in a liter of gasoline, it's really insanity. And it's so cheap, and all this infrastructure exists. So, yeah, I always, every day of the week, cognizant of what could happen to the negative. But no, I absolutely believe in this jurisdiction. Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC are tremendous places to conduct business. I think one of the biggest and most positive things we have going for us in Saskatchewan and in Alberta now is that It is my belief that the premiers of these two provinces will tolerate no interference in our business from the federal government. And it would appear from comments made by the feds that they also feel they can no longer interfere with us. So at least that risk is, to a certain extent, maybe outside the oil sands guys probably still have some, but for us conventional guys, I think we're going to have a level of support as long as we continue to pay outrageous, taxes and royalties into the system. I believe our regulators are going to support us. So it's a great place to be.
That might be counter to the common narrative that is told by the media these days that maybe oil and gas is a sunset industry and that there isn't that much opportunity. Do you find that it's hard to tell that message to people? Are you kind of in a lone camp? Do you find yourself having to explain your thinking behind that message?
I think there's a vast or large percentage of the world population that doesn't understand how things actually work or where things come from. You add enormous amounts of solar and wind to a grid, but then you still need the exact amount of baseline power generating capacity on the days that, and they will happen, that solar and wind, neither work. A cloudy, windless day in Alberta where it's real cold, your house is being heated by natural gas and your fridge is spinning because natural gas is being burned in a cogen somewhere in this province. And I don't know when there's a reality that changes. Like I've got a buddy that's a power trader, and once in a blue moon he'll flip you a chart, and he loves Cali. So there's been so much solar built down there that often in the middle of the day, power prices go negative and they have to pay the Nevada grid to take it. And yet by 8 p.m. when solar flashes down, the thermal has to fire up to cover the differential through the evening. And power prices spike to 20 plus cents a USD a kilowatt. So I don't have any trouble speaking the truth for as it clearly is. And maybe someday some sort of electrical technology shows up and someone builds solid state batteries that charge in 11 seconds and you can really move the majority of all of the things we do with hydrocarbons to something else. But I think that day is a long, long, long ways away. I will happily bet substantial money that oil sands, some of those facilities will produce for another 100 years, right? Like there's also so many wonderful things you can make carbon into. And that technology is very fascinating, and big, dense oil sands molecules, building materials. There's a million things, right?
On the flip side, everybody has rose-colored glasses for the energy industry now, at least in Calgary. One thing I've been thinking about lately is, what if we're wrong? Do you ever think about the downside if we are wrong and that energy supply isn't crunched and that demand isn't rising? And have you ever thought about that way, or do you ever structure your thinking that way, or how do you think of it?
I think the only way demand doesn't either stay flat or grow is if we're in for a recession greater than 2008. And we are very clearly moving from a world of substantial quantitative easing and artificially low interest rates to a more normal world. I get a mortgage in 2004 and it was 5.75. And is it going to surprise me if next summer that's what non-CMHC insured mortgages go to? Absolutely not. Will that affect demand a bit? Yes. Canada's mortgage to the hilt. The Americans aren't, right? They're in substantially better shape than us. Do I think as we move away from massive kind of globalized world, I think the Americans will outperform. They always do. This is a phenomenon that's been going on since they gained independence from the UK. And then looking around the world, people want cars, it's so much easier to move your economy into the modern world by letting people buy a gasoline powered car than trying to build sufficient electrical grid to their house. And, even if we look here, if we switched all of our vehicles to electrical. Where would we generate all that power? Right? You do always have the occasional day where you think like, wow.
What if I'm wrong?
What if I'm wrong?
Yeah,
we're all wrong. But you just can't. It has to be a major recession. And I also think that OPEC, whatever they thought they were going to accomplish in 2014, so forth and so on, I think OPEC has gotten themselves to a point now where they will react. I also think that U.S. production isn't going to grow by 2 million barrels a year ever, right? They're exponentially more efficient and more capable down there. And I do believe they'll keep their production rates at these levels for substantially longer than many people would like to think. But I also don't think they're not a direct competitor for excess capacity with OPEC anymore. And I'm going to bet you a lot of money that major representatives of the Saudi and Abu Dhabi royal families show up at conferences in Houston and sit down with the CEOs of these businesses to, I heard a story once from a buddy of mine down there that in 2014, before they cut, an Aramco representative spoke at a conference and warned everybody, if we didn't smarten up about rampant production growth, they were going to teach us a lesson. And no one listened, and they taught us a lesson. So I think the real downside risk, like, can you see $60 oil for a period of time or 50? Yes. Does that get hard on us? Yes. Do I see $25 oil for a year? I don't. We always need to average out good years with bad years and accept that they're coming, right?
Well, that's a great conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
Cool. Well, not something I would normally do, but we share enough friends that they suggested this would be a good experience.
Shout out to Marty Staples.
A shout out to Staples.
Thank you.
Cool.
We'll wrap it up there.
Awesome. Pleasure, man.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you liked what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.